Our thanks to the folks from Wesley United Methodist Church for their gathering us this morning. I'm going to ask us to begin to move to our seats and the ushers to begin to draw the doors closed at the back there. As we gather, let's listen to this scripture. This is again from the Message from 1 Corinthians 13th chapter. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr but don't love, I've got nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, or what I do, I'm bankrupt without love. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep secure the sins of others, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel, takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. May God bless us with our hearing of this word this morning. Before I get started, I want to just say a word that there's a new book that's out that it's called The Future of the United Methodist Church, 7 Pathways. It's written by a whole hassle of bishops, and hassle is the collective plural of bishops. Whenever there's 3 or more, it becomes a hassle of bishops. And I was one of the contributors to this, and one of the chapters in there is called Transforming Existing Congregations. And if you want just kind of a background to what we're doing in the Missouri Conference and why we're setting some of the priorities we are and what our approach is, that chapter gives a very helpful description of that. And I have received permission. Well, it's my own writing, but I still got to receive permission to have that chapter linked on our website so that you can go on like fivepractices.org, and I think it's either my most recent blog or the one before that. If you click on it, you can read that chapter. But that might just be a helpful. Oh, and it's also on your table now that I remember us talking about that, but I forgot that we'd done that. Okay, now we're going to talk about the appointment system, and I'm going to go into great detail. We're going to go behind the scenes and talk about step by step how appointments are made in the Missouri Conference. This is not necessarily how they're made in other conferences. This is not necessarily how they've been made under the leadership of other bishops, but this is the approach that we're taking now. I realize that we've got a lot of folks who are not here, but this conversation is only relevant if you're a pastor or if you are in a congregation that has a pastor appointed to you. So I hope you'll pay attention. I'm using some rather crude stuff up here, marker board and that kind of thing, because ideally, I mean, the ideal setting for this would be about 30 or 40 people where we could actually talk about the details and I could move through this. But we've decided to do the best we can in here, and I often, as the cabinet and other folks know, often have a marker board. If nothing else, it makes me more secure about where I'm going in the conversation, even if people can't read my writing. The thing that I would want to begin with is, as in everything, is the mission of the church, and we're crystal clear in our appointment process that the mission of the church comes first. And that is something that we say to ourselves and repeat constantly. Let me just check something here. There's a page I hope I brought with me. Yep, there it is. I'm going to get to that in a minute. The other thing that I would say is that we have tried in a very conscientious way in the last few years to make our appointment system much more consistent with the kind of values and expectations that we've lifted up as a conference and adopted as a conference. And so to make them more outward focused, to make them more mission driven, And what I'm going to be doing today is explaining a little bit about what that means. Now, if you will remember, if you had one of these green cards, and this is what we've adopted some years ago, our expectations is that all that we do is Christ-centered, that there's an element of fruitfulness, that we lift high the notion of the actual impact and result that we make in the lives of people in the communities around us, that we celebrate excellence and support excellence, that we offer our utmost and highest in all that we do, and we value that in the decisions we make, that we lift high the notion of accountability, that we hold each other accountable to the mission of fulfilling the mission of Jesus Christ. And then collaboration has to do with how we learn from others and reward learning from others and support sharing with others and learning from others. And then, of course, the 5 practices of congregations as we look at how congregations operate. Radical hospitality and passionate worship. It's fair for us to always be asking, how are our congregations doing in these areas? When we talk about mission field appointment process, this requires a little bit of definition, and the best way of getting after this is a story I heard one of my colleague bishops tell, and she'd served as a bishop for some years, and she talked about the progression of her thought in the appointment process during her time. And she said that she realized, looking back, that in the first few years that she was making appointments as a bishop, that the people that she was seeing in her mind when she thought about how is this appointment going to be received, was the district superintendent and the pastor involved. Are they going to be pleased? Are they going to be receptive? Are they going to feel like they've gotten a good deal in this? Are they going to be motivated? I mean, all those things. And then she realized that later, as she got to know her congregations better and everything, who she started picturing in her mind when she made appointments was how the congregation would receive the person. How would the pastor-parish relations committee respond? How would the leaders in that congregation feel about this? And then she realized that at last she kind of matured to a different understanding, and she tried to picture in her mind, became more aware of how are the people in that community around that church. What difference is this pastor going to make to them? Kind of the people who are not there. And so she matured in her understanding from being kind of pastor and DS-centered to being congregation-centered to being mission field-centered. And that's what I mean when I talk about mission field appointments. How do we maximize the possibility that this pastor and this congregation's effectiveness is going to increase in reaching the people who are around that congregation? Does that make sense? So when you hear that word mission field appointments, it has to do with looking beyond the local church, but looking through the local church to address those people around. So this idea of mission-driven appointment making, and especially this notion of fruitfulness, are very important in our appointment processes now. What do I mean by fruitfulness? Everybody immediately thinks of growth in attendance and growth, and well, those are good things, and we celebrate. That's a very important part of fruitfulness. But there are many other marks of fruitfulness, such as the mission activity in the congregation, the service ministry, the youth ministry, the outreach of different sorts, the small group ministry. There are many ways by which churches become more faithful and more fruitful. I think it was at Reverend Hayward's, one of his retirement parties that I went to. He's retired 3 or 4 times, as I recall, and God bless him. And he's one of our really effective pastors. But at one of those celebrations of his retirement, someone stood up and said every time he gave his keys back in at the time he finished serving a congregation, there was more church there than when he had picked up the keys when he came. Okay? Fruitfulness. I mean, that is about as basic as you can get, is there's more church, there's more ministry, there's greater faithfulness and greater fruitfulness when someone leaves than when someone comes. Okay? So those kind of things drive the appointment system in our conversations, mission field and fruitfulness and these values. The other thing that I want to say up front, and I say this, I try to carry the authority of this office in a way that is not heavy-handed or anything like that. But there is a certain truth that we've all got to understand at the basis of the appointment process. And the best way I can get after this is a story from when I was a pastor, and a district superintendent was conducting a training for pastor-parish relations committees and pastors. So there was a district superintendent, it was a district meeting, had pastor-parish relations committees and pastors all in the same room, and Reverend Goodenough stood up and he said, as we talk about the appointment system, the first thing I want you to realize is we three, the DS, the pastor, and the PPR committee members, we all have something in common here, and that is that none of us makes the appointment. Okay? That in the United Methodist Church, the entire authority of making appointments rests with the bishop. And everybody else plays a consultative role, a counseling role. And so it's not that other people's voices don't matter or not important or not taken into consideration. It's that at the end of the day, the authority rests with the bishop to make appointments. And that wasn't my idea, and it wasn't your idea, and we can argue whether it's a good idea or not, but that's just the way it is. And so that's kind of a given in the appointment process. And what that means, though, is that much of the work of district superintendents and of the cabinet and of my work is to gather information in order to make good decisions, to make the very best decision that serves the mission of the church. Now, if that's true, then information, understanding information in context is just vitally important. Information about the church, information about the community, information about the pastor, information about the pastor's family. And you might wonder, well, how does the bishop who has to make this decision gather the necessary information to make some kind of conscientious or positive decision in this? Well, you would be kind of surprised at how much I do hear and know, and directly and indirectly. I mean, I don't want to make anybody paranoid here, but I'm pretty restrained about exhibiting that because I really don't want people to feel paranoid. But, you know, when I run into people around annual conference here, pastors in particular and stuff, I'm often a whole lot more aware about what's going on in their churches or what's going on, family struggles that are going on or something like that than they may be aware of. And that's because it's part of my responsibility to be aware of that. Now, I don't want to scare them off by commenting on something sometimes, but that's part of my work and part of the work of the superintendents. Central to this information is the role of district superintendent. District superintendents are representatives of the Episcopal office or the bishop's office out in the fields and across the annual conference. So we have 12 superintendents that, and in this next year, 11 superintendents that cover just a wide range of churches, and a whole lot of their day-to-day operations is just listening, engaging people, and being involved in churches and pastors and in all kinds of ways. So that goes on kind of year-round. In particular, another major place where we get a notion of what's going on in a congregation is through the charge conference, through the decisions that are made at charge conference, through the reports that are made at charge conference, through the spirit of the meeting that's held at charge conference. A lot can be learned and picked up in that through that meeting and through those meetings. The monthly reports that pastors are responsible for fulfilling and putting reporting online that reports attendance and small group life and outreach ministries and those things. Some pastors may think, well, that's not important to me. Well, I got to tell you, it's important to me, and we learn a lot from those reports, including I say this with a smile, but take it as you like, including we learn a lot about people who avoid filling in those reports. We learn a lot about what's important and to that pastor and to that congregation. The visits that superintendents make throughout the year. They sometimes visit a church on a Sunday morning, sometimes they preach at a church, sometimes they're at a meeting of the PPR committee or something like that. But again, it's just kind of always the superintendent's role is to be kind of analyzing and assessing how is this ministry going. That just comes with the role to always be thinking in those terms. And then in the fall, there's a pastor-parish relations committee evaluation that is done of the pastor. And that becomes part of the information gathering. There also is the pastor's self-evaluation that is completed. And then there is the district superintendent's evaluation that takes into consideration those other two evaluations, right? And then even later, usually now toward the first of the year, end of one year, first of the next year, there is the consultation sheet that the pastor-parish relations committee completes. That's actually where there's a pretty explicit expectation that the church expresses some kind of preference about its future pastoral leadership. The same is true with the pastor. The pastor completes a consultation. If, for instance, one of those consultation forms says, if the church indicates, and it's signed by the members of the pastor-parish relations committee, that for some extraordinary reason they feel like the pastor should move, then that usually means there's more consultation that's done person to person, face to face, or over the phone or something with the district superintendent to follow up on that. There actually are not a great number of congregations that complete a form that says our pastor must move or something. And so the district superintendent re-engages. The same is true as if a pastor fills out a form that says I must move. The district superintendent will re-engage with that. And so that leads to these later further consultations. And then there are just what other information do we have? There also is the records of the church and the statistical reports that go back for years. And it's been eye-opening to me, and I think we've adjusted. You've gotten accustomed to me, and I've gotten accustomed to you, so now we're more in line with this. But one of the surprises of my first couple of years here is how frequently I knew much more about the statistics of your local church than either the pastor or the congregation did. And so often, we would look at a congregation's pattern and say, there's kind of an issue going on here, because for 10 years it went from 167 in attendance to 154 to 149 to 135 to 121 to 116, and now it's at 101, and the same pastor's been there through that same time, and we're asking, and what's coming back on all these evaluations is, this is just the best pastor we've ever had. If you ever move this pastor, send us another one just like this pastor. Well, we're looking at this and saying, well, you know, the church is 50% of the size it was when this pastor began. And so you may be satisfied with this pastor, but there's a concern that we see that often the congregation isn't aware of, or the pastor isn't fully cognizant of. So I think we've kind of broken through the significance of those long-term patterns and trends, and I don't think anybody in the room has any doubt about those being important to me. And then there is another set of information that is very important to us, and that's the demographics of the community where the church sits. There are places in Missouri that have seen a decrease in population every decade for more than 100 years. And there are other places that are increasing by 10, 12% almost every year. And so our expectations about how a congregation is functioning, we've got to put that in a context. In a place where the population is rapidly declining, sometimes just maintaining a worship attendance as the congregation ages is doing a faithful, fruitful job. And there are other places where maintaining, and it may be even growing slowly, means we're missing the huge demographic growth around us. And so that's important. We have a whole set of materials, a whole set of approaches and access to all kinds of information related to the demographics, and those things are available to your pastors, and they come through your superintendents, and they're used heavily by Bob Farr and Congregational Development and HCI and those things. But that demographics around a church is very important to us too. So we get all these different kinds of sources of information. In early February of each year, the cabinet goes off for nearly a full week of what we call assessment, and our shorthand for it in the cabinet is going to Windermere, because that's the Baptist Retreat Center where we kind of hide away for a week and spend some pretty intensive time looking at the overall picture of the spring appointment season. During that time, we remind ourselves of the appointment criteria that we're going to be using for the year, and we make any amendments to that. I'm going to read that in a moment. We spend a lot of time talking about the context and demographics and mission fields of our churches. Each district superintendent comes to Windermere with a book like this, which they give me. So I walk away with 12 of these things. And what these are all the reports of the full-time appointments in the district, along with an analysis of the demographics, the population shifts, and different recommendations about pastors in those areas. Also in here is the reports of those consultation forms that the Pastor Parish Relations Committee has completed and that the pastor has completed, as well as a summary of the evaluations. That's a lot of information when you think 12 of these, okay? And we go through each congregation and each full-time pastor and talk about where that is. Each of these has 10 years of statistics about apportionment payment, about membership, worship, church school, confessions of faith, and the financial information of the budget and so forth of the churches. And so that's quite a lot of information to digest, but we go through it all. We talk about all those who will be entering ministry, those who are now, sometimes final decisions haven't been made from the Board of Ordained Ministry, but as best as we can, we're trying to assess how many people are coming out of seminary, how many people will be needing full-time appointments, how many part-time people are requesting full-time appointments. Sometimes part-time local pastors would prefer to serve full-time. We assess as best we can how many will be leaving by retirement, or how many openings we have, and also how many, for various reasons, pastors are in kind of a situation where they must move because based on the evaluation of the district superintendent, or something that has happened in the congregation, or something with the pastor, we feel like this is one that just really is going to require a move, okay? So all of that's assessed during Windermere. Now, I said something about appointment criteria. This is something that at the beginning of our time at Windermere, I pass out a sheet. I've done this for 6 years since I've been here. And then we discuss this. We discuss each one of these, and sometimes we tweak them a little bit. We update them, or we add something to them. But it's a kind of agreement between me and the cabinet about why and how we're doing appointments, okay? And so this is about the appointment process. Number one, the mission of the church comes first. Number one, the mission of the church comes first. There are many other things that are going to influence us. What people like, don't like, preferences, family situations. We've got to remind ourselves constantly the mission of the church comes first. Number two, the appointment process deserves our honesty, a view for the good of the whole connection. All of us own all the challenges and problems we face together. I'm glad the whole is in your end of the boat doesn't make any sense in appointment making. You get that? Okay? That means that we go to great length for all the superintendents to own every situation, and not I've got a problem pastor or something. If I can just get him or her out of my district, then everything's okay. No. If there's a problem, we all need to address it and not just pass it along somehow. 3, we will develop a conscious pattern of rewarding excellence, creativity, effectiveness, and fruitfulness in the mission field and not just within the congregation. The appointment process is data supported. You know what data supported means? I mean, it's kind of like if, is there fruit that supports the reason we would make this appointment or continue this appointment? 4 years is the minimum service in an area for effectiveness, and we will not consider shorter appointment periods unless circumstances merit it. For churches under 200 in attendance, about 4 years, 200 to 500, 6 years, 500 and above, 8 years plus. Now those are just kind of minimum guidelines. What we find is the necessities of the appointment system cause us to have to breach that often because we need somebody over here, and so often we have to cut below it. But our initial thinking is every appointment is at least 4 years, okay? And larger churches, it's more like 6 or 8 years. 5, we will not move pastors during their provisional period except in extraordinary circumstances. A move precipitated by their actions restarts the provisional clock. We'll place provisional members in churches when possible rather than extension ministers. This has to do with those who are commissioned but are not yet ordained. We would rather them to have their full provisional time in one setting rather than 2 settings or more, because sometimes you don't have a full sense of somebody's effectiveness until their 2nd or 3rd year, until some of the chickens come home to roost for their own ministry, and sometimes that takes a while. 6, it is appropriate to talk about intentional leadership development for high potential gifted pastors for the long-term good of the mission of the church. 7, consultation. Consultation refers to conversations we have before an appointment is made. Okay? Our appointment of a pastor is not an invitation to consideration. Introductory meetings with pastor parish relations committees are not interviews. A pastor who desires to stay at a church which wants him or her to stay has more claim than one who desires to leave or who has been requested to leave by their congregation. I'm going to explain this in a minute. In all cases, if there is a second appointment that is made for a pastor, the first offer will always be the best one. We also realize, let me go back and explain what this means. Consultation refers to the conversations that take place before the appointment is made. That means that if a district superintendent calls to make an appointment, to say, you've been appointed to here, or calls the pastor parish relations committee and says something similar to that, it's beyond the consultation. The consultation was all those things on that other page that led up to that. But once the appointment's made, it's made. Introductory meetings to pastor parish relations committees when a new pastor is introduced is not an interview, it's an introduction. Now that might seem, what's the difference in that? I've been here 6 years of appointments, and probably in that time, made 350 to 400 full-time appointments. There have been only 3 instances where someone was introduced to a congregation, and for reasons that we did not anticipate before that, we realized that this was not going to work, okay? And so we backed off that appointment. But it's not an interview like, it's not a Baptist congregational system, it's an appointment system. This other line that it says a pastor who desires to stay at a church, if a pastor is doing very well and desires to stay and that congregation wants her to stay, if they receive that phone call, we'd like you to go here, there may be room for the person to say, I've prayerfully considered this, and I will go where sent, but but I would prefer to stay. And there's a good chance we may honor that unless we feel that we have to because of the larger mission of the church, right? But a pastor who said, I want to move, I want to move, I want to move, or I have to move, or where the congregation has said this pastor must move, we can't. When that phone call comes, that pastor has no ability to come back and say, no, that's not what I'm interested in. Okay? Number 8, we'll begin with strategic congregations rather than at the top of the declension sheet. We make the order of our thinking through appointments, as we'll see in a minute, is based on the strategic nature of the church and of that appointment rather than how high the salary is. 9, will work firmly and graciously to encourage ineffective pastors to exit rather than to appoint them to places where we have no confidence they can succeed. 10, part-time appointments and lay missioners and some local pastor situations will be worked out by the district superintendents involved, and we will follow all disciplinary requirements for credentialing and will not appoint anyone before the district committee completes its work. So why are part-time appointments not handled at the full table? Why are they handled within districts? The reason is that some of these are very part-time. They're 4 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a week, and so no one's going to move across the state to serve in a position that is $8,000 salary to work in a part-time position. So it's going to be someone locally there, and the only person or the best person who knows that is that district superintendent. So it's not really a whole conference with all the other superintendents involved to settle it. We'll have all appointments completed by mid-May and avoid last-minute pre-conference changes. And finally, we'll attend to systems that restrain our mission, such as the shortage of female leadership in large churches, resistance to cross-cultural appointments, shortage of young elders, etc. Such conversations will focus on the mission. So one of the other things that we look at is kind of how are we doing in using the fullness of the gifts of ministry that are before us. And I got to say, I'm just going to be real blunt on something here. We have a number of kind of very fruitful cross-cultural appointments that are just going wonderfully, and then often we appoint female clergy to churches that have not had female clergy to them before. I mean, many of those are just extraordinary ministries. When a congregation expresses their resistance to that up front without ever meeting a person, number one, we may not be honoring that, most likely won't be. I mean, that's not going to be the final determining is what the congregation says. But second, we learn something about that congregation that is not altogether positive sometimes. We realize that congregation is limiting the potential of its ministry, and I just kind of want you to be aware of that. So we're back at Windermere. We're getting all this information. We identify the critical appointments in each district, and also the most critical appointments of the whole conference year as best we can. We identify high potential churches and high producing churches, and same with clergy. And we go through all that, and then we finish up at Windermere, and we have a pretty good idea of how many openings we have. An opening is where somebody is leaving our system by retirement or moving to an extension ministry. They're moving out of our appointment of local churches, okay? And so we don't have to take into account where they're going. There's just an opening there, right? That's what opening means, and that's different from move, where the person's moving to someplace and somebody must follow them, okay? So an opening is just a clear opening that way. So we know those numbers, we have all that. What happens next is each superintendent may have 2 or 3, sometimes more, sometimes up to 5 or 6 in his or her district, of then kind of clear openings or of congregations where they know there's going to be a move, where that's just essential. And in the week after Windermere, I meet with each superintendent individually, and I require them to have a worksheet on each one of these churches and pastors that gives what their best recommendation would be for the appointment that would fill that opening and why they do it. They've got to justify it, and we talk through it. So let's say a pastor has, a district superintendent has 3 churches that are open by retirement. I sit down with that superintendent, and they suggest they have 3 pastors that they've thought about: Mary, Joe, and Ann. Okay, and I say, now, why is Mary number 1? Where is Mary serving now? So they've got this all written out, but I'm pressing them. What makes you think this would be a match? Have you thought about this? What about Mary's family situation? What in her background would make you think that this, what makes this context work? And we just kind of press and we walk through. Now, what makes you put Joe second? And we walk through that, and that's meant to prepare us for the first appointment session. When we get, we'll get to that later. When we get to our first appointive session, then that means the districts, we've had a year of information. We have all those reports. I've got my big book that I've spent a lot of time going through about each church, and particularly those where there are going to be moves or openings. And now we've had personal conversations around each of the appointments that we know are going to be open. Okay, and then we gather and we spend 2 days in appointive session, and this is usually mid to late February. And then we meet 2 days every week, almost every week, until middle of May. Okay? We usually skip Holy Week and maybe one other week, but we have a whole wide number of those. And what do we do when we gather? Now, again, a part of me wishes we were all close together where we could see this more clearly. Are you going to be able to read the numbers on this? What you'll see is that there are a system of chains. And where these white cards are, those are churches where there are clear openings, meaning somebody has left our system, probably by retirement or into some extension minister, and so there is no place that we've got to consider where is that person going. And on this board, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 openings. All right? Over here, you have pastors up here who are coming into our system, who are moving, but they need and require a full-time appointment, but but maybe they're leaving, where they're leaving is going to become part-time, so they need a full-time appointment by the guaranteed appointment, right? So we must place them in a full-time appointment, but there's nothing behind them, okay? So when they leave, we can't put another full-time person behind them. And then these are commissioned. Once you're commissioned, you're eligible, you fall under guaranteed appointment also, so these must find a place in full-time appointment. And then these are people who are seeking full-time appointment, and they have claim, guaranteed appointment. This one is as a chaplain maybe coming into our system who is an elder or a deacon, an elder in this case, who is coming from extension, and so we have a requirement for placing that person. And these two are probationary elder? What's that? Coming off leave of absence or something. Yes, coming off family leave or coming off leave of absence. And here's someone else from extension. So let's play something with the math here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now, before we even name a church or a person, what are we aware of? That there are more people, there are 13 people who will need full-time appointments, and there will be 10 openings. Well, you say, okay, well, let's just take this commission person and put them right there. Well, wait a second. Guess what? That church is going to need somebody that has 25 years experience, you know. And so these churches are in all different ranges. These don't fit into those blanks, and there are more of these than will fit into that, right? By the way, when we do this for real, you're seeing just half the board. The other half would be over here. And instead of there being 10 of these, there'd be anywhere from 15 to 25 of these, okay? And instead of being 13 of these, there'll be 25 or 30 of these. So it's much more complicated. We're simplifying it for this demonstration. So let's say that in our deciding, thinking about what is our most critical appointment, here's the highest paying church that's open. This is one of our big churches. That salary's way up there, over $90,000. $78,000, this is the total package of support for a pastor. 63, then down here, 39, 40, 42, okay? So those are the churches that are clear openings. But often what happens is our analysis of this is that the most strategic church is this one for this year. Frankly, in the last few years, it's been common for us to decide that one of our three most strategic appointments was an associate pastor's position. Because in some of our churches, the associate pastors are preaching to 400 and 500 people and developing their own contemporary services and will have a much more significant impact than many people who are serving as solo pastors or as lead pastors somewhere. So we decide this is the first church that we've got to solve, is this one right here. And so what happens is we've had all this information, we've been talking about this, the whole cabinet has known this is open since Windermere because this pastor's retiring. I've met with the district superintendent, talked about 2 or 3 names. We kind of brainstorm around this. Where is the answer to this? Is this likely to come from someone who, the other section of this board, these are the people who are in a situation where they must move. Either the superintendent has decided that, or the church has decided that, or the pastor has decided that. This is our most critical appointment on chain B. Frankly, the answer to that, if that's our most critical appointment, is not likely to be in a situation where the church is saying this person must move, right? It's probably not going to be one of these where there's no full-time appointment behind the person, and it's probably not going to be one of these new people in the ministry. So how are we going to solve this? This is where it gets really challenging for all of us. After much discernment, we're probably going to decide that the best person to serve this is someone who's serving a church that would like that pastor to remain, and that pastor didn't know that he or she was going to be called upon to move, right? So we say Pastor N looks like the best person, and we put it sideways we're just going to consider that for now. And what that does is it then means that the opening has changed, and it's moved down here. So now the open church in chain B is no longer church 2, it's church 19. Well, I'm going to move this along because we're running out of time. So let's say we go through all this again and we think about, well, who's going to serve church 19? And we put in Pastor P there, and that means that now church 21 is coming. What about church 1 over here? Well, actually, we searched, and it's a pretty significant increase in salary, but as far as gifts and the context and stuff, it's Pastor Q, and that creates an opening right there. And so it goes, and at some point here, I'm going to play around with this. I'm going to put this one in here, Pastor O, and Pastor 20. And then I'm going to jump down here and go like this. It really takes more consideration than I'm giving it right now. And when the final church has a pastor beside it, and there's nothing that follows, that chain is complete. But we don't do one chain at a time, and the reason we put these sideways is because we're also working on this one over here, and we're thinking about that. And I know it frustrates some people that we sometimes take quite a bit of time with our appointments in the spring, but we leave a lot of these cards sideways, and so we do our good work, we decide, we look at that, and then we all drive home, and then we come back the next week, and sometimes someone says, I've been thinking about it and praying about it, and they make the case that actually this should go over here, and that should go over here. And so we leave it flexible until there's a time where we finally go back and say, we're going to consider that appointment made and that appointment made, and we'll make 3 appointments all at once, just like that. And this is going on with 25 of these chains. Okay? There are some things up on that board that ought to give you pause. One of them is, it was no accident that I put up here that about half of the pastors in this chain actually are stepping down in salary, even though we think they're the very best person and they've done excellent work where they've been. It is very challenging for us to deal with the inequities of salary here and there, and sometimes a very high potential congregation and high producing congregation has a lower salary than a congregation where someone's doing gifted work, and we need that person, but it's often a step down in salary to do that. There's also a larger economic thing. This is a macro look at the appointment system. It's possible to add up, when all of this is done, kind of how many dollars are out there that are being paid to full-time people under full-time appointments. Every time a church goes from full-time to part-time, those dollars are no longer, we can no longer use those in the appointment system for full-time appointments, okay? And every time a church between pastors moves from one salary and cuts their salary by $10,000, that's $10,000 more out of the system. And because of the trends over a number of years in the Missouri Conference, every year that we make appointments for full-time pastors, there are about $300,000 to $400,000 less dollars, fewer dollars, for full-time appointments than there was the year before. Now, because there's so many people serving in ministry, that may not affect any one. It may not be felt as deeply as it really is, but that trend's pretty strong, and so that means that a large number of our pastors make parallel moves or step down, and in terms of salary, but that's just kind of the realities of the appointment system these days, and that isn't punitive in a lot of cases, because it's just how many dollars there are and how many full-time appointments there are. Well, through all of that, there are several things that we try to do. Number one, keep the mission of the church in focus. Why have we appointed this pastor there? There are many different factors. There's what the congregation's interested in. There's family concerns. There's a whole host of things. Sometimes we can match those things. Sometimes we cannot. But our responsibility is to keep the mission first. Sometimes a pastor will say, I am happy to serve and willing to serve and desire to serve full-time, and I'm an elder, but I must be in this area of the state. And they list a geographic area because of a spouse's job or career, or because of other family considerations or something like that. Well, number one, we may not be able to honor that because when we put the mission of the church first, we're not ever going to take a pastor out to move someone in just so that someone can be closer to their, for their own personal reasons, okay? So we're not going to push from behind and push pastors out in order to solve those kinds of issues. Second is anytime someone puts some limitation on the appointment system, I must have this, I must do that or something, if we try to accommodate that, it isn't our fault, it's just a reality of the way it works. That usually means that we can't meet other desires the person may have. So often the person says, I want to be in the St. Louis area, and I want to have a salary above such and such, and a church of a certain size. Well, often it comes down to, well, if you're going to be in the St. Louis area, we can make no guarantees at all about salary. Because that doesn't give us the flexibility that we could have in that and so forth. Okay? So that's something about how the appointments are made. Now, if you're thinking, gosh, what a crazy system, let me tell you what the alternatives are. Because frankly, this is the way a lot of annual conferences make appointments. The alternatives is appointments are made for relational reasons. How well do you know the district superintendent? How well known are you by the bishop? Are you the bishop's friend? Are you the district superintendent's friend? Are you that pastor's friend? Have you gotten to know the people in that church? Another way that appointments are often made in conferences is a very siloed approach, that it's like a poker game between district superintendents. And so they hold their cards close to their vest and they try to trade here and there, and they're just looking out for their own district. The conference I came out of, why they did this when I don't know, I think they're changing that, but when in my system, in Southwest Texas Conference, it used to be they would do one complete run, like one complete chain, and they wouldn't move on to another chain until they completed that chain. And that meant there was never any chance to change your mind as you went through it, and you weren't working multiple things. You were just going down one thing, down runs. Some systems become entirely salary driven, that every move must be a little increase in salary, and it can't be more than so much, and it's limited this way and that, but it's driven by salary. Some are driven entirely by tenure, who has the most time in the ministry, and therefore they get first preference. Some are driven by the personal preferences of pastors, where the whole work of the superintendency and the cabinet is trying to address the various needs and concerns of the pastors. Some are driven by conflict, allow conflict within churches to dictate what the appointment system is going to do at every step. Some are driven by the satisfaction of the trying to please either the pastor or the congregation. What will make the congregation happy? Happy churches are us. What will make the pastor happy? Happy pastors are us. And that often creates that situation that I began with, where somebody's happy with their appointment and the church is happy with them, but they miss out that the church is going downhill while they're all having fun. Okay, and the other is to use an entire egalitarian type of approach that says every church is equal, every pastor is equal, instead of focusing on critical appointments or high potential or high producing areas and so forth. Now, we're running out of time. I would love to say a few more words, but I'm feeling the crunch of time here. Once the appointment is made, there's a process that then begins that we try to take very carefully, because we want to treat every pastor with respect and every congregation with respect. So let's say that we have decided that Pastor Q is going to Church 1. The pastor, the district superintendent, let's say that this pastor is from another district from where Church 1 is right now, okay? So the district superintendent of Church 1 and the district superintendent, where Pastor Q is now, will get together. They'll get all their information together about that church. They'll have a time of prayer. Sometimes this is together in the same room. Sometimes it's they do this by phone. And then the Pastor Q, superintendent, will call him, and say, sometimes we lose pastors in this. I bet every pastor has felt like this has happened to you, hasn't it? Just got lost in the... So superintendent calls Pastor Q and says, the bishop, the cabinet has considered this, and we'd like to appoint you to such and such. Very shortly after, the district superintendent of Church 1 will then speak to Pastor Q and tell them about the church, okay? And give them some time to consider this and to mull this over and speak with your spouse. I'd like to say, take a few weeks and mull it up. No, in all honesty, it's usually, and we'll talk to you in the morning. It's pretty short timeline. And Pastor Q says, I've talked it over with my spouse. We're delighted to serve. We're honored to serve with this. The next thing that will happen is superintendent of Church 1 will call the Pastor Parish Relations Committee chair of Church 1, and they'll set up a time to introduce Pastor Q. That often will happen within just a couple of days. Like if this decision was made on a Tuesday, the pastor talks it over Tuesday night with spouse. Wednesday, Pastor Parish Relations Committee of Church 1 is contacted. They set up a meeting to introduce the pastor for Saturday morning. One of the things that happens at that introductory meeting is a plan is made about how this will be announced eventually, but there's another step to go here. The next thing that happens is after that introductory meeting, the superintendent of Pastor Q then calls the Pastor Parish Relations Committee of the church where Pastor Q is coming from and says, I need to meet with your Pastor Parish Relations Committee. Okay? The DS meets with the Pastor Parish Relations Committee from the church where Pastor Q is coming from, with Pastor Q present most of the time. Pastor Q says, I've accepted an appointment, and I've loved my time here, but I've been called to this other work, and now the Pastor Parish Relations Committee, guess what? They didn't see this coming many times, because for us to fill the openings that are caused by retirements means inevitably that we will move many pastors who are serving well where they're serving, and who their congregation didn't want to see them move. Okay, so that Pastor Parish Relations Committee is hearing this. The DS says we'll be working on the appointment to this church. We're working on it already. And this, is there anything else that you would like us to know? Because often there's a difference between what they say in those consultation forms when they're absolutely sure their pastor's going to return. From now, they have this new reality that their pastor's going to move. And so there's conversation there with the district superintendent. And then there is this rather detailed way we work out how communication will work so that Church 1, the announcement of who their new pastor is, does not come before the church where he or she's leaving knows they're leaving, so that this all happens at one time, right? And that takes a lot to orchestrate, especially in a day of texting and this kind of thing, because we don't want that church to hear secondhand that their pastor's going. We'd rather do this with integrity there. And it's only after both churches have heard this and made it public that we then make it public on our conference web page and that kind of thing. So that's more or less how the appointment system works. At the end of the day, this is something we talk about all the time with the cabinet, but I often put this sentence up on the board. I have appointed fill in the name. 2, fill in the name of the church, so that. And I want us to make decisions that allows us to finish that sentence in a way that is mission-driven. You hear? I have appointed, Ann to First United Methodist Church so that church, and then just fill it out. And it gets very contextual. It's different for every church. So that they can begin to meet the needs of that community, so that they can strengthen their young adult ministry, so that they can reach out and start a mission initiative, so that they can, okay? But that's what it means to talk about it being mission-driven. Friends, I would love to tell you that the system is perfect, that we never make mistakes, that we know all things and can anticipate all things, but that's not the way it is. What I can tell you is that it's done very prayerfully, and it's done very conscientiously, and it's done with an acute attention to the mission of the church, and as much as we can to a sensitivity to the pastors and to the congregations. But it's not easy, and it's not simple. It's very complex. And central to this is the work of your pastor parish relations committees, your pastor parish relation committee chairs, and also just very central to this is the role of district superintendents. They do an excellent job. They do a lot of work. They're, when you see them around, often they seem like they're always busy with something because the superintendent role is a very taxing role. But at the end of the day, among their central responsibility is to help give me good counsel in the appointment process. And I think by and large they do an excellent job at that. And so if we had all the time in the world and had a smaller group, we'd take questions and we'd move this further along. But that's how the appointment process works. I did not realize until I started talking about, well, maybe we ought to just describe how it works sometime. I didn't realize that this was not more broadly known. The conference that I came out of, when we were in our probationary years, they had a game that they created called the cabinet game. That was like a board game. And it was basically, you have so many pastors and you have so much experience and you got salaries here and you got a crisis there and you got a family crisis over there and you'd have to sort through. And it was to teach pastors in their probationary years the complexity of the appointment process. And it does get complex. I've made it very simple here, but remember this is twice as large, and then things, sometimes it's like trying to change the wheels on your bicycle while continuing to pedal it down the road. Because what happens is you get this all figured out, and then there's a death in the family of one of these pastors in the middle of this or something that causes you to say, this is not the right time. And if you change this one out and say, we're going to take this one, we can't move this person at this time, well, that affects everything after that. And so you're back to starting over in that. So it's very complex. Well, friends, let's stretch for about 10 minutes, and then we will reconvene our morning session. Appreciate your patience with this.